Something's wrong. That ship just changed scan pattern mid-pass. Log it and isolate that frequency now. Commander Harvin Dalk's voice snapped across the Terran orbital surveillance deck, cutting through the static-laced updates like a blade. Every operative turned, hands moving faster over control pads and HUD interfaces. The Zohari vessel, classified diplomatic observer, had shifted orbital drift against its declared flight path and pulsed a directed scan sweep over Earth's defense net, skipping authorization protocols. Inside the control pit, the lights dimmed slightly as electromagnetic shielding adjusted automatically. Thin arcs of static traced across the reinforced viewing bay. The Zohari craft didn't transmit identification. It didn't ask for clearance. It made a slow arc over Earth's equator, traced both hemispheres, then exited trajectory as if Earth were a discarded file. The room stayed quiet, not out of awe, out of recognition. Dalk straightened his coat and muttered without turning, "We've been assessed." 3 days later, the leak surfaced. No watermark, no signature, just the header of a Zohari internal evaluation marked trade level clearance, and a single line beneath it that sent Global Command into cold silence. Human systems remain fractured, high variability in military doctrine, no unified defense consensus, elevated emotional governance risk, candidate not viable for alliance, recommend downgrade to bartered species status. The words didn't spark outrage, not officially, not immediately, because by the time Earth's top diplomatic staff had passed the insult, the economic maneuver was already in play. Zohari logistics fleets began redrawing their gate corridors, interstellar transit nodes were rerouted, Earth's nearest gate relays were labeled secondary non-priority, a diplomatic euphemism for isolation. Within 12 standard days, Terran New Sol experienced a 67% drop in external shipping manifests. Within a month, Brazil's orbital mineral contracts collapsed. 2 export-reliant economies ground into stasis. Cargo freighters rerouted mid-flight to avoid breaching Dominion lanes. Earth had not been attacked, it had been removed. At the heart of the Terran Directorate complex, an angular, jet-black structure woven into the Greenlandic basalt cliffs, Director Van Kess stood motionless beneath the hard blue sweep of the operations core. Laser plasma displays cycled silent streams of disruption reports, gate downgrades, embargo echoes, and diplomatic withdrawals. His face never changed. His right index finger hovered millimeters over a sealed slot recessed behind a mechanical failsafe. The chamber's single AI interface spoke without effect. Section 9 null protocol authorization requested. Stand by for biometric confirmation. Director Kess didn't speak. He simply turned his eyes toward the observation bay where the globe rotated beneath a lattice of failing trade routes. Then he pressed. Deep below, inside a hardened vault shielded from EM detection and global grid mapping, a dormant logic lattice reactivated. Echo Mosaic was not a counterstrike system. It had no missiles, no targeting logic. It was a survival grid designed for sovereignty during total signal denial, 700 independent silos hidden across the solar system, each operating with partial fragments of Terran command, energy systems, and cold logistics. The man responsible for designing Cypher 4, the darkest node in that grid, hadn't been seen in public since the program was mothballed. He'd refused every commission, declined every consultation. He lived in silence near the Sea of Tranquility, just beyond the lunar helix array, beneath a dome buried in ash drift and ice. Inside that dome, Commander Rivenhalst wiped condensation off a corroded diagnostic plate. The tremor in his arm wasn't age, it was fatigue carried too long without utility. Behind him, a transport drone settled with a magnetic thud. The Directorate's emblem glowed on its side. Command Directive, Reactivation, Cypher 4. The drone's panel extended. Inside it, a sealed command key. Riven stared at it. The last time he'd held one, humanity was testing simulations against theoretical enemies, not real ones. He didn't ask questions. He packed nothing. He walked aboard and sat with the restraint harness across his chest and his hands clasped once, loosely. No one spoke. The drone lifted, silent beneath the lunar shell, and burned toward Lunar Systems Command. When he arrived, the air inside the command shell carried the scent of overcycled coolant and reprocessed carbon. The lighting had been dimmed deliberately, standard during mosaic conditioning drills. No identifiers, no briefings, just a path of red markers leading him to the same terminal he'd used a decade ago. It booted without credentials. It remembered his pulse pattern. Lines of fragmented lattice logic scrolled across the display. Silo echoes, boot signatures, cold start progressions. All dormant systems were activating in sequence, not to attack, not to respond, to vanish. That was the mosaic's core purpose, not to resist, but to dislocate. Earth would appear crippled, collapsed, unresponsive. But in truth, it would run parallel, divorced from any infrastructure visible to orbit or interstellar scan. Every visible channel was now a ghost corridor, every fallback route an illusion. The Zohari would see failure. Earth would operate in blackout. Riven leaned back and exhaled. He said nothing. Not because he didn't care, but because every word he might have used had already been said, years ago, when the simulate. Ions showed that Earth would not survive a conventional blockade. Only misdirection could survive scrutiny. Only silence could beat classification. Back on Earth, civilian systems began to show signs of decay, transit lags, communications blackouts, orbital corrections aborted mid-course. Civilians protested, mildly, then with confusion, then fatigue. The media showed flickers of debate before feeds began to drop. In orbit, Zohari diplomatic monitors logged the collapse with cold efficiency. No military mobilizations, no counterstatements, no distress pings. They believed Earth was exactly what they'd declared. Too fractured, too emotional, too late to matter. What they didn't see were the echo silos activating behind thermal cloaks. What they didn't know was that the traffic they watched spiral into disorder was theater. And what they would never anticipate was that Earth wasn't panicking. It was repositioning, not for war, not for rebuttal, for control, silent, incomplete, intact. Because Earth had seen something Zohari intelligence had missed, that the strongest strategy didn't start with impact. It started with not being found, and Riven Hulst had built something to make them search in all the wrong places. Begin cold state isolation. All grid links severed. Physical relay fallback only. Commander Riven Hulst didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His tone cut clean through the command shell's reinforced walls, prompting technicians and analysts to move as if gravity had doubled. The Lunar Systems console flooded with updated lattice diagnostics, each node blinking yellow as systems detached from Earth's satellite backbone. Cold state meant no ping, no handshake, no return signal. From orbit, Earth would appear silent. That was the point. The floor trembled underfoot as grounding rods shifted in the crust below. Ice condensate on the upper beams fractured audibly as containment vents equalized pressure. Somewhere beneath them, a silo the size of a naval cruiser spun to life inside its basalt casing. It didn't emit heat. It didn't connect to any known Terran infrastructure. It simply began to listen. The lights dimmed, not from failure, but from conservation. Across every continent, sensor clusters disengaged from standard orbital sync. Weather stations ceased automated reporting. Fuel depots stalled their last outbound shipments before locking internal valves. Civil aviation froze. Port cranes stopped mid-swing, and in the skies, orbital relays flickered off one by one. The Terran Directorate didn't broadcast a message, didn't file a complaint. It vanished in layers. At street level, the disappearance felt like a storm with no wind, lights failing without cause, traffic signals blinking nonsensically, broadcast feeds dropping mid-sentence. On a bridge near Istanbul, commuters stood outside their cars, staring up at a blackened billboard that had once shown a feed from the Mars Callisto relay. A teenager tapped his phone against the railing. A man in uniform stared at the skyline with his fists tightening, not in anger, but anticipation. Inside one of the underground directive silos beneath the Canadian shield, thermal vents cycled once and sealed. Commander Halst stepped through the core corridor, boots clicking against tile panels lacquered in matte carbon. Engineers passed him without speaking. Each wore a full-face mask coded by clearance level. No one stopped to explain what Echo Mosaic was doing. Everyone already knew. At the heart of the silo, the system core pulsed under a synthetic crystal sheath, layered with directional noise-dampening arrays. The heads-up display projected a triangular command interface with every node across the 700-lattice matrix in dynamic sequence. No node talked to another directly. Each operated with incomplete data, autonomous protocol trees, and a single directive: maintain illusion. Confirm decoupling cascade complete, Halst ordered. The tech beside him, a wiry man with hands stained from coolant rework, tapped a sequence. Severance at 100%, except for Tier 7 faux loopbacks, the ones we left in for the scan. Good. Halst didn't nod. He watched the sequence unfold without expression. The faux loopbacks were the bait, carefully choreographed subsystems left alive for Zohari surveillance. They'd transmit failures, crashes, misfiring logistics, indicators of a civilization spinning into collapse. The real systems, power, defense, communications, were already off-grid, talking only through shielded tunnel pulse packets, hand-carried where needed. Mosaic didn't just hide Earth's infrastructure, it built a fake one and left the lights on. At Zohari Command, located within the radial chambers of the Cernath spiral, reports began arriving in stacked cycles. The Earth node had gone dark. Defense beacons ceased output. Primary satellites dropped transmission during orbital pass. Automatic classification returned empty. A containment blackout was a burst across the satellite shell to freeze space-based traffic and disorient ground coordination. The moment that pulse hit, Zohari monitors believed Earth would show its cracks. Instead, they saw perfect collapse. No resistance, no rerouting, no redundant fail-safes, just dead screens. They believed they had succeeded. Back on Earth, the Directorate's next phase began under Operation Sweeplock. Civilian broadcasts resumed selectively, transmitting curated anomalies. Power restored inconsistently in some cities, only to fail again. Emergency services redirected with apparent confusion. Security drones broadcast conflicting patrol paths as if response logic had degraded. Holst observed the simulation unfold on a large vertical panel within the silo's core strategy vault. One section showed a drone convoy pausing in mid-air, redirecting to an unpowered base, then returning to orbit, deliberately choreographed to look like routing confusion. Another feed showed construction bots cannibalizing their own transport frames as if misconfigured. Every image routed to publicly visible feeds. Every detail exaggerated Earth's incompetence. But in reality, those drones were shipping reinforced tunnel beacons to key outposts, laying down the next layer of physical fallback pathways. The convoy's erratic motion was a cover, smuggling infrastructure past orbit-facing monitors. Misdirection wasn't decoration. It was armor. Commander Halst walked through a maintenance corridor toward the depth link lift. The static on the walls shifted gently as pressure equalized across environmental buffers. The air carried a faint metallic tang, like heat-treated alloy. Not because of failure, but because one of the vented modules had burned through its tether early. He made a note of it with a clipped voice command. The lift took him 3 levels down to Cipher 4's observation chamber, a hexagonal space with only one screen and one chair. The screen showed nothing at all. Because this node didn't observe, it simulated. Cipher 4's job was to predict Zohari behavioral reaction through layered cultural misinterpretation models. They didn't need to decode Zohari algorithms. They needed to feed them stories that matched their expectations, while introducing just enough variance to disrupt confirmation logic. Run model Delta 6, Halst said. The system complied. A new simulation played out. Zohari scouts observing Earth's relay see Ector as it boots an obsolete AI protocol from a collapsed zone. The scouts file a low-threat report. A day later, the AI spikes power beyond containment. The Dominion flags it as system failure and ignores the alert. Holst smiled faintly. The trick wasn't to deceive the enemy, it was to overwhelm their classification. Sweeplock's strength was ambiguity, injecting false narratives so layered with human unpredictability that Dominion war doctrine, which required clarity for activation, remained frozen. Within 48 hours, 3 Zohari AI oversight modules had already downgraded Earth from containment active to passive collapse. Their analytics interpreted Earth's visible failures as final. From their view, the planet wasn't a threat, it was dying. And that was the moment Mosaic came alive. Across the moon, in Antarctica, in the rusted ruins of Jakarta's old orbital terminal, cold systems sparked inside bunkered cores. Drones moved without broadcasting identification, rail systems realigned below ground, cargo stations resumed movement under blackout. The planet wasn't offline. It had gone beneath detection. It operated like a ghost, visible only when it wanted to be, and somewhere behind the sealed chamber of Cipher 4, a new directive initialized. It did not contain firepower. It carried something far more dangerous, a map of what the Zohari expected next. And it would give them all of it, just twisted enough to bring them down. Commander Vale, these fleet markers don't match orbital projection. They're shadowing targets that don't exist. The comms officer's hands hovered, uncertain, above the wide arc of the Dominion's primary navigation console. Dozens of icons shimmered across the heads-up array, fleet positions layered over Earth's orbital sphere like a net. Vale stepped forward, his upper crest dim under the bridge lights, and tilted his focus to ward the central readout. 3 task forces, designated Linear 6, Vassal 2 and Edge Core, were logged within the Terran hemisphere. 2 of those task forces had been reassigned 3 hours ago to the Zenth corridor, yet the display placed them both near Luna. Query confirms transit log was altered, another voice said from above. Timestamp data looped back on itself. Beacon trails double-pulsed inside a closed corridor. Vale narrowed his gaze. And still no human transmission? None authorized, none requested. From behind the command well, a soft whine of recalibration ran through the Zohari fleet management deck, ending in a ripple of flickering icons. One of the scouts stationed in Sector Relo 8 sent a flag, cargo transfers spotted between 2 orbital rigs over Earth. Vale tapped the icon and brought the footage forward. What displayed was unremarkable at first glance. 2 supply vessels exchanging containers on a timed rotation. Until the system flagged an anomaly. The base they were refueling from had been destroyed 23 days ago during the initial containment burst. Loop the feed again, Vale ordered, and cross-match the energy signature of that outpost. The technician hesitated. Sir, the registry of that installation shows reactor failure logged. Total collapse. It's not supposed to exist. In silence, Vale watched the supposed wreck operate cleanly, like a living node resurrected from deletion. Deep within Cipher 4's control array, buried in a hardened shell beneath the Sea of Tranquility, Riven Hulst examined the playback as well. The footage had been lifted from a decoy uplink and fed directly into a Dominion-side monitoring sweep. It hadn't been inserted, it had been invited. Cipher 4 didn't simulate impossible data. It bent plausibility until the Zohari classified it themselves. The footage was real, just time-shifted, routed through a duplicate node, stripped of sequence. On text, then mirrored. Nothing added, only removed. Riven didn't need to fabricate chaos, he only needed to misplace the sequence of cause and effect. The broadcast wasn't noise, it was timing. His next command was whispered, almost absent-mindedly. Initiate Merge Drift. Merge Drift had been designed for long-range diplomatic protocols, used to mask high-security messages during cross-border peace accords. The signal mimicked Zohari encryption patterns, enough to pass through mid-tier security without immediate detection. On Cipher 4, that system had been restructured, not to break into networks, but to inject signal clutter into active command loops. It seeded plausible inconsistencies, false authentication stamps, corrupted routing keys, delay-spiked timestamps. A delay of even 2 seconds in the Dominion's fleet hierarchy was enough to destabilize the chain. At Fleet Quadrant Theta 12, an order to reposition 2 capital ships rerouted through a communications subnode experiencing duplicated validation. As a result, the order echoed to 3 additional ships in the region, each interpreting the instruction with different reinforcement protocols. By the time Fleet Lead Varnis realized the duplication, one vessel had already broken rank and rotated weapon locks toward the other, triggering a fire protocol without primary confirmation. It wasn't a full assault. It was a warning discharge, a single salvo across bowline trajectory intended to reset command alignment. The flare of that warning burst, however, was caught by a 3rd Division monitoring the same corridor. Assuming mutiny, they accelerated response procedures, moving toward intercept. Protocol dictated stabilization through threat presence. But the moment they pushed forward, the internal alignment matrix fractured further as both original fleets began countershifting into defensive posture. Inside the Domi, Neon's Warstack interface, dozens of subordinate AI clusters began conflicting. Threat level, medium. Origin, human deception possible. Confidence, 57. Recommended action, delay command issuance. A second stack returned a contradictory evaluation. Threat level, high. Origin, internal deviation. Confidence, 42%. Recommended action, emergency override. Neither reached consensus. Both delayed further execution, effectively halting all command outputs pending executive override. Onboard Cypher 4, Riven's hands hovered above a narrow terminal, his eyes not on the screen, but on the tactile indicators built into the console edge. Small vibrations layered through resonance pulses, confirming that 3 out of 5 Dominion battle clusters had entered fault-seeking protocols. He exhaled once, quietly. That's the break. Earth didn't need a fleet. It didn't need firepower. It only needed their doctrine to devour itself. Inside the Cernath Command Arc, the senior Zohari strategists held an emergency alignment session. Their war doctrine was built on a single assumption, that Central Command must never doubt the integrity of its own signals. Once compromised, protocol dictated halt, diagnosis, realignment, and so their fleets waited, while Earth moved. At the orbital edge of the Saturn corridor, 2 Terran cargo units, unarmed, autonomous, passed through what should have been a locked Dominion checkpoint. The Zohari monitors didn't intercept. Their authorization scripts had been paused mid-cycle, stuck between confirmation and denial. When asked to respond, one of the AI channels on the Zohari side returned a simple routing error. Origin address mismatch. The address was fake, but built from a Zohari template used for internal memos during classified fleet simulations. Someone had resurrected their own dummy protocol and weaponized it against them. Riven Hulst sat alone in the darkness of the simulation chamber as Cypher 4 began rerunning Dominion reaction models at triple speed. His jaw tightened as he reviewed one scenario and noise, too little alignment. They weren't fighting Earth. They were fighting the consequences of assuming Earth couldn't mimic their own language, and now, even among themselves, their orders tasted of doubt. Riven reached forward, tapped a final sequence. A single line appeared across the central terminal. Status: signal confidence reduced below operational threshold. No weapons fired, and in war, that was enough to kill trust. They're reinforcing an empty shell, whispered analyst Vekar, adjusting the overlay filter on his heads-up visor. That orbital point was decommissioned during their last sweep. There's nothing there. Across the Dominion's fleet coordination chamber, the laser plasma displays sputtered through a stack of misaligned fleet trajectories, each one flagged as valid by a different classification node. Outpost Theta Rho, long marked as defunct by Zohari protocol logs, now glowed as a high-threat response vector. 5 carriers rerouted to protect it. Commander Vale's jaw flexed. His fingers tapped once on the side of the primary command console, flipping through 4 different signal origin reports. Each had arrived seconds apart, labeled as urgent, each slightly varied in timestamp, each containing confirmation keys pulled from a now obsolete security schema. To the system, they were authentic. To any officer with memory, fabrications built on ghost logic. "Track the source," he ordered. The response came after a pause. Signal triangulation results in a recursive loop, origin traced to a previously traced vector. It's bouncing through our own archives. Somewhere in orbit, a cruiser spun into defense alignment around a shadow. Another responded to a burst that never came. And a third drifted past its hold point, engine silent, crew not answering. Within the next 10 hours, 3 Zohari fleet segments disappeared from coordinated monitoring, whether absorbed by the false orders, dismantled in panicked skirmishes, or abandoned by captains who stopped trusting their own directives, remained unclear. Dominion Command ordered a temporary stand-down to realign the war stack hierarchy. The override protocol, something meant to restore control during civil unrest, was activated. But the override depended on confirmation pulses routed through synchronized infrastructure. Earth had already fractured that grid. Each new message carried a thread of uncertainty. Each corrected command was interpreted differently across the net. The more they tried to clean the system, the more corrupted outputs were generated. At Earth's lunar command, inside Cipher 4's deep chamber, Riven Halst observed the incoming flood of Zohari procedural self-loops. Each one entered the terminal like a ripple, visually clean, but corrupted in metadata. One particularly satisfying loop showed a Zohari distress beacon being reclassified as a piracy alert by its own oversight system, resulting in its automatic dismissal. "They're deleting themselves," said Tarek Benz, the cyberstructural analyst seated behind him. He leaned forward. "This one got flagged 3 times before the header rewrote itself to match an outdated distress template. The Dominion's AI wrote over it again, then classified the entire stream as decoy chatter." "Send it," Halst replied. Tarek blinked. "To who?" "Everyone." They didn't need to guess how neutral systems would interpret it. A Galactic diplomatic node received a copy within minutes. The Intersectoral Observation Forum pushed the recording to its ethics board. Before the cycle ended, over 4,000 third-party networks had seen the footage. Zohari AI classifying its own call for help as a civilian attack. Zohari warships, Ispir says, courting themselves to phantom coordinates. Zohari analysts pushing patches that generated more bugs than they fixed. Not one of these incidents had been directly caused by Earth's systems. Cipher 4 hadn't injected commands. It had opened just enough bandwidth for Zohari doctrine to trip over itself. In the galactic trade zone of Velos Prime, a delegation from the Ogren Accord watched the loop in stunned silence. One of their observers, a retired systems theorist, stood and muttered a line that would become legend across merchant vessels. "The humans didn't counter them, they unthreaded their memory." The phrase spread faster than the leak. Back in the field, cargo lanes marked under Dominion control began vanishing, not from interdiction, but from administrative decay. Zohari supply lines routed through Earth-adjacent gates began rejecting traffic. Safety protocols flagged gate alignments as unstable. Entire convoys were grounded until reauthorization could be confirmed, except the confirmation logic never resolved. As the hours dragged on, captains grew nervous. Some returned home, others didn't. Word spread of a battleship seen drifting, unresponsive, its signal beacon repeating a Dominion code dated 6 decades prior. When scavengers boarded it, they found no crew, only empty decks running on power-saving cycles. Logs had been scrubbed mid-message. The final entry was a single directive, repeating every 10 seconds. "Stand by for mission realignment." Back on Earth, Riven Halst authorized the final packet of curated errors to be pushed through neutral diplomatic lines. Unlike the previous data drops, these weren't leaked anonymously. They were stamped with Earth Directorate clearance. It was a statement, not of aggression, but of awareness. The packet contained 9 minutes of compiled footage, a Zohari fleet realigning to defend a non-existent colony, an emergency override command being rejected due to protocol mismatch, a battle AI simulation mistaking a navigation signal for a tactical threat, and rerouting fleet-wide defense arrays in response. a bridge commander questioning his own orders aloud before being muted by auto-override. A cargo freighter initiating distress, ignored because its code resembled a known training scenario. The footage was dry, unedited, no voiceover, no commentary. It didn't need one. Across the galactic grid, neutral states began recalibrating trade policy. One by one, Allied systems suspended transit partnerships with the Zohari. Some issued public statements requesting clarity, others simply cut channels. In those corridors, diplomats stopped asking Earth what weapons they had. They asked what they'd built that could make a superpower's doctrine fracture without a single missile. Fear didn't spread from firepower. It spread from something worse, an understanding that Earth had done all this without revealing the full scope of what it could do. In the orbital skyline above Earth, the stars were quiet. Dominion forces hovered in uncertainty, their commands locked in cycles they could no longer trust. And Earth hadn't declared war. It hadn't even spoken. It simply watched them unravel. Activate crawler launch sequence. Sector Deltara. Confirm all beacons are offline before exposure, Commander Rivenhalst said, his voice level, as if he were starting a routine logistics drill. He leaned forward, bracing one hand on the edge of the command well inside the deep-tier vault beneath the Greenlandic Directorate. Cold air brushed across the floor plates as heat was rerouted into the docking banks beneath the surface. 10 kilometers below, buried beneath false terrain and thermal scatter mesh, the gate crawlers moved. These were not warships. They bore no flags, carried no weapons. Each was a blunt, cylindrical vessel with a spined core and folded spanner arms, designed not to defend, but to endure. They'd been there for over a decade, motionless, powered only by trickle cores tied to geothermal inputs. Hidden, forgotten by most. Until now. The heads-up array flared to life, tracking every ignition. One by one, green arcs traced vertical departures from shielded silos. Each crawler left the silo at a staggered interval, silent through the atmosphere, untraceable by standard Dominion scan. No emissions, no standard relay pings. Every thruster pulse mimicked early mining engines designed to resemble post-industrial waste haulers. On Dominion logs, they registered as debris. Riven stood in silence, watching their flight paths as they curved toward the edges of Earth's known gravity well. Each crawler was assigned to a dormant wormhole relic, ancient gate structures that had fallen out of commercial use when the Zohari standardized their corridor system. The Dominion had dismissed them as unviable, but Earth had never needed speed, it needed privacy. "Confirm crawler lock-on to Haven Drift," said Holst. Tarek Benz, now lead systems integrator on crawler operations, tapped a control strip and squinted as a series of response loops lit across the panel. "We have partial sync. Jump latencies high, but the gate's stable. Core bloom within acceptable margins." Hulst didn't respond. He didn't need to. Haven Drift had been offline for 71 years. Now, Earth's crawler had forced it open again, not with brute power, but with redundancy architecture slipped past its decayed fail-safes. Every crawler carried a tethered core designed to reroute power from gravitational wake patterns. Where other species sought clean jumps, Earth's crawlers made dirty ones, long, slow, but operational. In the orbital shadow above Europa, Crawler 3 exited from Titan's dark band and flared a trailing ion plume across the empty drift corridor. Beyond it, the abandoned Vir relay flickered once, then pulsed as a connection bridge reinitialized after decades offline. From the Dominion's outer detection spheres, the sudden gate activation was flagged as an anomaly. The AI systems flagged an old Earth export vessel type making an unauthorized approach. The log registered it as a scrapped cargo hull type. The event was dismissed. Inside Crawler 3, there was no crew. Only rotating logic cores and heat-managed relay arms grinding into position. The crawler extended a long-frame spine into the mouth of the relic gate, then anchored itself. 2 minutes later, its tail beacon pulsed a successful stabilization ping. Earth's first post-Dominion commerce jump had been made. Inside Lunar Command, the room remained quiet. The map in front of Riven updated slowly, adding a set of new relay threads, each marked as green, each routed through dormant or dismissed gate sectors. None crossed the Dominion's core corridors. All operated on ghost frequency ranges, those left behind when commercial realignment deemed them unworthy of maintenance. They had built their own corridor map, quietly, off-chart, parallel. On Velos Prime, the diplomatic assembly of the Orvan Confederacy watched the footage in real time. The Terran Directorate had sent it through a side channel. No fanfare, no declaration. A single transmission labeled, "Unmonitored Trade Route Proposal." It was an invitation, not a warning. Inside the Orvan chamber, murmurs broke out. Their own fleets had begun to avoid Zohari-linked jump points after reports of cascading data failures. Their merchants were calling for alternatives. Now Earth had presented one, and it was already operational. On board the old relay station orbiting Dalin Free, Nang, the first Orvan observer, docked without incident. The station still bore signs of Terran construction, angled struts, practical systems, reinforced cargo latches. The air recycled cleanly, the logs were intact, and inside a sealed panel on the station's wall was a physical document, a hard copy manifest of all trade paths being reactivated. No digital interface, just ink and pressure seals. Handwritten along the bottom, "Neutrality doesn't require permission, only commitment." By the end of that cycle, 3 additional neutral systems requested crawler route access keys from Earth. The Directorate didn't respond through official embassies. It routed through old freight cooperatives. Not one message passed through Zohari space. Inside Cipher 4, Riven Hulst folded his arms. A technician beside him hesitated before speaking. "We're getting flagged," she said. "Dominion Net pinged 2 of the gate activations. We're in their visibility arc." "That was expected," Riven replied. "Are they intercepting?" "Negative. Their response tier is frozen. Standing orders still marked internal realignment." He nodded once. That phrase meant they were still locked in recovery loops. Zohari doctrine couldn't initiate external directives while under cross-sector misalignment classification. They couldn't react, even if they wanted to. Their doctrine didn't allow exceptions without a supermajority override, which the fractured fleet command couldn't provide. "We won't need long," he said. "Just enough for trade to reroute. Once the patterns shift, the rest handles itself." "Then what?" Riven turned toward the wide lateral viewport. The Earth hung in the distance, dotted with grid-silent relays, each now functioning in pure autonomy. "Then we stop asking." No war declaration had ever been issued. Not a single Terran missile had been launched. Earth hadn't made demands, threatened retaliation, or filed diplomatic protest. It had simply built a system that didn't include its oppressor. By the end of the cycle, trade volumes through Earth's crawler network surpassed projections. 3 independent fleets rerouted shipments. 8 species issued formal inquiries. The term Dominion Standard Pathways began to vanish from the shipping consortium registers. And Earth, once deemed irrelevant, now offered what the Dominion couldn't: operational continuity without doctrinal failure. It didn't negotiate its re-entry. It created one. "Collapse in 2 sectors confirmed. Velan and Brar," the operative announced, breath tight as he delivered the words across the circular council floor. "Zohari command tiers failed to synchronize. Civil blocks aren't responding to interlink requests. Internal queries are now being rerouted to non-Dominion platforms." The Directorate chamber didn't erupt with celebration. It didn't shift at all. Riven Hulst stood in the upper gallery, hands behind his back, observing the ripple with the same neutral posture he'd carried since reactivation. Silence had become their weapon, and now silence became the result. Every link in the Dominion's chain was bending, not to Earth's fleet or fire, but to doubt. A doubt designed, layered, released, and left to grow. At first, the collapse had been administrative, messages arriving out of order, task forces that couldn't verify their command vectors, But when Zohari member states realized Earth's relay crawlers were fully operational, trading with outer systems and keeping stable metrics, the center of gravity began to shift. Dominion oversight committees requested internal audits. Sectors once under unified routing flagged divergence events and broadcast their own economic keys. Some quietly erased their registry from the Dominion's interstellar ledgers and began importing through Earth's sleeper corridors. Riven turned from the gallery and began descending the side ramp, the soles of his boots echoing softly against composite flooring. Around him, analysts ran silent updates. Their faces held the exhaustion of long execution, not joy. Earth hadn't been spared from pressure, it had simply chosen not to compete inside the framework designed to contain it. In the Council's external chamber, a single printed statement was affixed to the media postboard, a thin white slip sealed under layered laminate. There were no emblems, no state colors, no rally slogans, just a classification header and a line of bureaucratic text. Protocol executed under Section 9 null. Outcome logged. Directive closed. It wasn't a declaration, it was a record, and to most watching from neutral territories, it said more than any broadcast ever could. Inside the Galactic Assembly node at Cyrene Gate, the term echoed had begun to evolve. It no longer referred to a tactic. It had become a category used by diplomats, traders, and information officers to classify any event where traditional power collapsed under misread intention. To be echoed now meant having your assumptions weaponized against you, your response structures bypassed without needing confrontation. It was both insult and warning. When the final Zohari sector failed to restore signal alignment after multiple override loops, external systems began enacting protective disconnection. Long-established alliances paused joint actions. Technical partners revoked mutual trust credentials. What had once been a seamless network of Dominion-structured hegemony began to resemble a scattered quilt of silenced links, asynchronous AI cores, and provisional command chains. And Earth said nothing. They didn't petition for influence. They didn't send envoys to capitalize on the vacuum. Trade continued. Messages were routed. Cargo moved without display, without formality, not because Earth demanded acceptance, but because it no longer needed permission to operate. Their systems weren't built on dominance. They were built on absence, the right kind, the kind that made others fill in the gaps with fear. Back in Lunar Command, Halst passed through the administrative corridor where Cipher 4 had first reactivated. The silence in this wing wasn't enforced, it simply lingered. Most operations had been rerouted to surface nodes or ghost terminals, now hidden inside Earth's reformed crawler lanes. The vault hadn't been visited in 4 cycles. He passed one of the old sensor tunnels, ran his fingers along the edge where the access control had once read his pulse. The panel was dormant now, power stripped, locks decommissioned. "Leave it sealed," Halst said quietly, not to anyone in particular. The technician walking 3 steps behind him nodded and made a note on his manual tablet. They arrived at the inner corridor. The lights buzzed low, cast at an angle from embedded ceiling panels designed for functional clarity, not spectacle. The air was dry, aged by constant recirculation, but breathable, sharp on the inhale, as if the walls had stored memories in dust. At the end of the hallway sat the silent core. Cipher 4's outer shell was intact, but the relay circuits had been retracted. The whole thing looked more like a relic than the epicenter of an operation that had broken an empire. There were no labels, no documentation, no ceremonial plaques, only Holst, standing alone as the technician waited halfway down the hall with professional distance. He reached the threshold, stopped, and stood for a long moment. The chamber didn't greet him. It didn't power up. It had done its work. It had rewritten the nature of reaction itself, buried Earth's defenses inside doubt, and made every Zohari algorithm second-guess the very signals it received. He could still recall the first simulation he ran here, not a battle, not a fleet victory, one that collapsed command not by hacking, but by offering just enough internal contradiction to stall reaction. It had been dismissed as thou, Eori theater. It was too inefficient, too subtle, too slow to matter in real war. Now, entire systems were fracturing under that inefficiency. Not one shot fired, just a structure that no longer aligned itself. He turned from the core and walked back down the corridor. There was nothing left for him to adjust. The operation had finished not with a broadcast, not with a detonation, but with the inability of an empire to name what had been done to it. By the time he reached the shuttle bay, reports were already coming in. A Zahari commander had defected quietly to a neutral node. A commerce guild in the core rings had signed long-term exchange with Earth under crawler protocols, and 3 minor systems had publicly asked Earth for advisory support on signal disruption architecture. None of these events required response. They weren't provocations. They were shifts, permanent, undeniable. Inside the shuttle, Hulst removed his outer coat and placed it across the auxiliary seat. He sat, hands steady, watching the launch doors open without ceremony. Outside, the stars framed Earth with its thousands of silent nodes, each one alive, active, unspoken. The AI pilot engaged launch vector as the inner doors sealed. "Destination, Commander?" it asked. He stared ahead, calm. "Where they're already listening." Then he leaned back, closed his eyes once, and allowed the silence to carry him forward. Not as a general, not as a symbol, but as the last echo of a strategy: win without being seen, how to speak without speaking, how to make history through absence, and how to let others name the fear for them. What do you think is more dangerous, an enemy with overwhelming firepower, or one that lets you destroy yourself trying to understand them? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more mind-bending HFY stories where humanity rewrites the rules of power, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we're just getting started.